Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a minute and then we will start. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Good morning again, everyone. We're going to wait for another minute to let everyone join that wishes to, and then we will start. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Good morning, everyone. It is now 11:02 by my time, so we're going to go ahead and start. We will have a recording available if you miss any of this, but we have a very exciting or a lot of interesting topics for you today. So I do hope that you can stay for the length of the hour. I'll introduce myself. My name is Helen Combs. I am the EMEA Content Team Manager, and I was previously part of the UK and Irish team, which is why I'm also very happy to be here today. I will be joined by some of my colleagues today to tell you more about the legal changes in the UK. First, Susan unfortunately had to excuse herself. We have Guy online. Guy, I'll let you take it over.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everybody. Guy Charteris, representing the UK Business Development Team this morning. Delighted to be here. Within the market that Red Online operates, there are any number of providers of EHS solutions, which may come in the form of regulatory content, consultancy services, or software, but often these are provided in isolation. At Red Online, we combine all of these functions under one roof. It allows us to design a solution that's designed to meet your exacting needs and will keep you, enable us to build you a tailored legal register and emphasize and share with you how that legal content continues to change and develop, where you identify non-compliances, put in place and instigate those appropriate corrective action plans, and provide you with immediate access to our legal experts located around the globe. There's no other provider in the market that can combine those three functions under one roof. Helen.
Thanks, Guy. And speaking of some of our legal experts, this morning we will have one legal expert joining us. Rachel is part of our UK and Irish team, and she started last year with us. She has a lot of experience both as an EHS advisor and within the legal field, and it's my pleasure to have her online this morning. Graham, unfortunately, has taken ill, so I will be replacing him. I'm a poor replacement, but we will make do. What are we going to talk about this morning? We're going to start by talking about legal changes that have happened in the UK. Then we'll go on to talk about some of the ones that have happened in Ireland within the past 6 months. And finally, we have another interesting section for you. We know there's been some questions, there's been some changes, so we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into machinery and mechanisms for safety-related concerns around machinery. So I'll go ahead and start with the UK side, and I'll turn it over afterwards to Rachel. Stay with us. We will talk about all these things together. 1 minute for housekeeping. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. We will answer as many as possible during this webinar. Any that we cannot get to, we will answer within the next day or two via email. So don't hesitate. If you do have a technical issue, the chat box is probably more appropriate. We have people online who are here to help. But with that, let's go ahead and start. So in the UK, what has happened in the UK in the past couple months? I'm going to focus on 4 different topics. The first one is around packaging reporting. If you've been with us for a little bit, or if you've attended some of our previous webinars, you know there's been quite a few changes in the UK around packaging waste reporting. The one that is on the screen is the most recent. So we have had a new amendment to the packaging waste data reporting regulations of 2023. The one on the screen is for England. There are equivalents in all 4 jurisdictions. So this applies throughout the UK, even if it is different laws that govern it. The first new change is that there has been a new category of requirements for single-use drink containers. It also highlights that that if a container is made of more than one material, it is the material that is predominant by weight that will classify the category of packaging under which this container falls under. So this is very important to understand. The exact definition of what a drinks container is on the screen, and I will let you read it. I know not all of you may be affected by drinks container. However, the other changes will be more interesting to you as well. There has been some new clarifications around definitions within the regulation. The most notable ones are in importers and final users, so 2 types of producers. They are meant to clarify the differences between types of producers under the regulation and make these categories clearer. We have explained this in the past. We will continue to do so as we go on. But we should note that there is a new category of producers that has been added to the list of producers covered by the regulation. This new category is called a first UK owner. So what does it take to be a first UK owner? You would be a first UK owner under this regulation if the packaging, if your packaging is packed or filled in the UK on behalf of a company or a person that is not within the UK. You could also have packaging that is not owned by anyone in the UK. And finally, if a filled packaging is supplied to someone established in the UK, you would become the first UK owner. If you are a first UK owner, you become a producer of packaging material under the regulation. So if you are in any of these categories, before you may have not been classified as a producer, you will now be classified as a producer with the changes that were put in place. The last requirement is for our colleagues and friends out there who are large producers. So a large producer is a producer who has a turnover of over £2 million in the previous year and handles more than 50 tons of packaging material annually. If you submitted a report under these regulations in relation to packaging material, that would have already been covered by reporting requirements in the producer responsibility obligation packaging waste regulation of 2007, you can submit the data through the 2023 regulations instead and combine both reporting requirements at the same time. The information submitted should include the portion of relevant packaging that is required to be recycled under the 2007 regulations. So that's our first change. So definitely something to look at. If you were previously not classified as a producer, but you are a first UK owner, you are now considered a producer. So definitely something to look for. If you're with us, we're going to ask that question very soon. If you want to hear more, definitely get in touch with us. The second topic I will look at today is around greenhouse gas emission trading scheme. There has been a new amendment. It's the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Order of 2024. What does this mean? It highlights some minor changes in the greenhouse gas emission trading scheme. It's minor in terms of how it changes, but it does create a new allocation period. So if you're part of the GHG ETS scheme, so greenhouse gas emissions trading schemes, there is a new allocation period that is opening. It is the 2026-2030 allocation period. In order to participate in this 2026 to 2030 allocation period, operators of installations have to apply to the scheme and or provide information required under the scheme during the application window. So for this period of 2026-2030 allocation, you will have to, the window will open on the 1st of April 2025 and close on the 30th of June 2025. It is next year, but something to start preparing for and to be aware of. So if you're currently in the greenhouse gas emission trading scheme or are intending to take part in the 2026-2030 allocation period, you will need to apply, or rather provide information under the scheme by the 30th of June 2025. After this application is closed, the authority, so the UK ETS Emission Trading Scheme Authority, must publish the allocation tables as soon as reasonably possible, but no later than the 28th of the 28th of February 2026, which means that by that date, you will have the full, or we will all have the full information about the allocations that were made under the greenhouse gas emission trading schemes for the 2026 to 2030 allocation period. So again, if you are part of this scheme, you want to be aware and start getting your numbers and make sure that you are applying within the window to continue to participate. If you are joining the scheme, you will want to make sure you have your information submitted during the window that will be next year. So less than a year from now, but something to be aware of. Our next topic, and you might know that the emission trading schemes are linked to some of the EU topics. Well, we're going to stay on that general topic and look at the retained EU Law Revocation and Reform Act 2023. I know it says 2023. If you've been to any of our webinars in the past couple months, you know that we've talked about this before. We will continue to talk about it because it is a major change in law. And the final effects took place on the 31st of December 2023. So so in the last 6 months. Some things to note, there has been some changes as well. So first, just so we're all on the same page, this act revokes a number of EU laws that had been effective within the UK and repealed any retained rights, powers, liabilities, obligations, restrictions, remedies, and procedures originating from the EU and accessible in the UK. Some of the other changes to highlight is that the EU law is no longer has supremacy over UK law and is not actually binding, legally binding within the UK system unless it is granted legal status by the UK Parliament. That means that EU law that is retained currently has been passed in some way, shape, or form by the UK Parliament. EU general principles of law also no longer apply, and EU law can be revoked without requiring a replacement. We've talked about this in the past because some of the major laws that in the EHS field would have known from the EU could have been part of this. At the bottom of the slide, you can see highlighted some areas of EHS that are affected by these changes. So things like fishing, water management, flood risk, emissions and pollutions, energy. One that is important to note, because this is the change that has happened in the past couple of weeks, is that the classification, labeling and packaging regulations, so CLP, that we know if you handle chemicals, you will know this law, in the first drafts had been included as something that would be revoked. This has been changed in the past couple of years. So the CLP regulations have been removed from the list of texts that were to be repealed, and that that means that currently the CLP regulations, the classification, labeling, and packaging regulations, are still retained laws for now in the UK. We have other examples of similar laws that were retained but then changed. So the big one would be the REACH regulation. So within the retained REACH regulation, the UK implemented their own accreditation system called the UK REACH. We can assume that the changes that will happen to a regulation like the CLP, classification, labeling, packaging regulations, will be similar. If you want to see the full list of texts that are being affected by the retained EU Law Revocation Reform Act of 2023, you can find that in the schedules of the Act on the government's legislation website. So some changes we are continuing to monitor. There will be more changes to the list of full retained EU laws or laws that are being revoked that originate from the EU, and laws that will be put in place either to replace or not those laws within the UK. So we are monitoring that. We will continue to tell you about it. If you have any questions, don't forget to use the Q&A box. My last topic for the day is around the energy savings and opportunity scheme, because there's been a new amendment there has been an amendment in 2023. However, something that maybe not all of you realize is that there are obligations and deadlines that are coming up on the 5th of June, 2024, for reports to be submitted. Previously, if you were a member of the ESOS, so Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, you were exempt from requirements as a result of having the ISO 50001 accreditation. The amendment that happened last year to the ESOS regulations removes that exemption in some instances. And therefore, even if you have the ISO 50001 accreditation, you may need to submit some reports under ESOS. So that's why we wanted to highlight this change, because we know that it's very common for participants of the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme to have ISO 50001 and therefore in the past have been exempted from having to prepare the reports. It's worth pointing out that if you are a member of the scheme without ISO 50001, you still have to comply with the requirement that we will be highlighting now, and you may already be in compliance with them. So reporting deadlines are on the 5th of June, 2024. Remember that date, 5th of June, 2024. If you were or if you are ISO accredited, you do not need to appoint a lead assessor under the scheme. You do need to report, however. So the new changes or if you were not previously reporting, you will be required to do a couple of things. The first one is to calculate your total energy use for your site or your business and use that to calculate your energy intensity ratio. The total energy use calculation is a requirement under the ISO 50001 either way, but it does mean that it could be requested by the relevant authorities if you are participating in the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. So along with these calculations that must be included, there is some other information that you have to put into your ESOS reports. Again, the deadline for this and the submission and preparation is the 5th of June, 2024. I'll highlight, and this is why we're highlighting it again. The report does not need to be submitted to the relevant authority under the scheme, but it could be requested by them. So you have to have it prepared. You do need a board level director to confirm that they have reviewed the findings related to your ISO accreditation, reviewed that the organization is compliant, and that the information provided within the new compliance notification is correct. So that can take some time, which is why we're reminding you now. The compliance notification is a new requirement that does need to be submitted to the relevant authorities. So even if you don't need to submit your report, you do have to submit your ESOS compliance assessment. and that is whether or not you are ISO accredited. The compliance assessment is essentially a statement submitted to the authorities to confirm that you are compliant with ESOS and must include your calculation of energy usage and energy intensity ratios, any energy audits you have had, and a summary of information related to energy saving measures identified through ESOS assessments. Those are the ones we'll highlight. There is a full list of what is needed to be included that can be found within the new government guidance on the topic. You can find that online. We also can provide it. Red Online has prepared and will soon be releasing some additional information on the topic to highlight these changes and direct you to where you can find additional the legislation and additional guidance on it. As a reminder, the deadline for submission of the compliance notification is also on the 5th of June, 2024. So that means you should have both your ESOS report and the compliance notification ready by the 5th of June, 2024. If you are ISO 50001, you may need to prepare the report, and you must also submit the ESOS compliance assessment. That is what I had for you today. I hope that was useful. We have some polls for you before we move on to our to Ireland and then later to machinery. So I'm going to open the poll right now. And the question is, were you aware of the ESOS changes or rather the 50,001? So the changes to ESOS in relation to ISO 50001. We're going to wait a minute to give everyone a chance to answer. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function to make sure that to ask any questions you have. We'll be happy to answer them either at the end of the call or later on in the week. Okay, I'm going to give everyone another 10 seconds and then we'll see the results. So if you would like to participate in the poll, it should have appeared on your screen. You should be able to see it. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. It looks like the majority of you were not aware of this change, so I'm glad that we spent some extra time on it. And as we said, Red Online will be releasing additional information as well as links towards guidance in the next couple of weeks. So definitely keep an eye out, and we're here to help. I will now turn it over to Rachel.
Hi, Helen, thank you. I'm going to talk a bit about Ireland now and some of the changes throughout Q1. So there weren't many changes to start in the quarter, but we've found over the last sort of month or so, there's been some new regulations that I think you'll find quite interesting. So we'll start by discussing waste. We discussed this in the last webinar, and there's a few additional changes to sort of waste regulations that have come out in Q1. Firstly, the deposit return scheme. So that was launched on the 1st of February 2024, and it was brought into force by the separate collection deposit return scheme regulations. You might have heard of it known as the return scheme, and you'll see on new beverage containers, they'll have a little symbol that's part of the return scheme. So this is part of the government's circular economy targets. And what it means is when a consumer buys a beverage container, that's an in-scope container, they'll have to pay a deposit on that, and then they can return it and get the deposit back. So there will be some, or there are now because it's in force, some requirements on businesses. So if you're affected by the scheme, you have to be a producer, a retailer, a distributor, or a return point operator of beverage containers. So similar to what Helen discussed in the UK about beverage containers having sort of a new definition, it's similar in Ireland. It's got to be manufactured from PET, aluminium or steel, and the capacity is between 150 millilitres and 3 litres. So if you are a producer, or if you meet one of the sort of definitions that I've discussed, then you will have some requirements under the new regulations. And the other change in the extended producer responsibility scheme. So that now includes all categories of tyres. So if you produce tyres, then look in the 8th schedule of the waste management tyres and waste tyres regulations, because if you produce the tyres that come in that category, then it's been expanded into to tyres included now. So that'll enter into force from the 1st of January 2025. And the idea of this is to hold producers accountable throughout the full life cycle of the product. So we'll move on to the next slide and discuss chemical agents. You might have seen this, it's quite a recent change, and it came out on the 5th of April. Previously, the regulations were the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work carcinogen regulations, and that's been expanded now to include mutagens and reprotoxic substances. So there's some new compliance requirements for businesses, and that includes engaging a competent person to carry out risk assessment. So if you work with any of the substances that are considered of carcinogenic, mutagenic or reprotoxic, then you need to ensure that you are carrying out risk assessment and try and reduce the use of the hazardous material and the potential exposure of the material as much as you can. So there's also been, that came out at the same time, and it accompanies the regulations, the Chemical Agents Code of Practice. And if we just look on the next slide, there's a, this has been updated with the occupational exposure values. So you can see here, this is just a snip from the guide. So it's been updated with the exposure values over an 8-hour time-weighted average and a 15-minute short-term exposure limit. So for example, you can see on the slide here, we've got isopropyl alcohol used commonly in industry. And it's got the 2 reference periods. We've got 200 parts per million for your 8-hour time-weighted average and 400 parts per million over your 15-minute reference period. Now, the regulations and the code of practice state that you must be able to monitor that your employees aren't exposed to anything higher than these amounts. So this is the absolute maximum that people could be potentially exposed to. So if you don't have any sort of procedure in place for this monitoring, then you need to be engaging a competent person to do that for you. And as well as the these values here, there's been some updates to the values of some carcinogenic substances. So if you work with benzene, acrylonitrile or nickel compounds, then their limit values have been revised. And the code of practice now also contains the biological limit values for lead. So if you work with chemicals, then it would be worthwhile going and looking at this new code of practice. You can find that on the HSA website and just check your compliance requirements because they will have changed. So we've also got a few additional changes. Some might not affect everyone. So we've got the Wildlife Amendment Act came into force last year. So this is the requirement for public bodies to consider biodiversity in the policies. And it aligns with the National Biodiversity Action Plan that came out in January, and it's got actions set out for public bodies and the government to try and reverse the decline in biodiversity. So it contains actions to try and tackle the biodiversity problem by 2030. And the Wildlife Amendment Act links to the National Biodiversity Plan. We've also got the 2 statistics, Business Energy Use Survey Order and Environmental Expenditure Survey Order. The business energy use, that's a sort of a revision of the previous one. So you will have had to do this in the past. This just came out in January, and it's a requirement to report energy use. So it previously was up to 2023. We've now got in 2027 to report from 2023 to 2027. So keep that one in mind. The environmental expenditure, this has just come out recently, and this is a requirement for businesses to complete a survey reporting environmental protection expenditure. There's also, if you're in the fishing industry, there's been some updates to working time regulations. So They've changed that so that fishermen should not work more than 48 hours per week, calculated over a reference period of a maximum of 12 months. Finally, we've got the Climate Action Plan. Ireland published the Climate Action Plan in January, and it contains information on climate risks and the specific actions that the government have set out to tackle them. So that's what we've got that's new. We've got some upcoming changes, and these have come from the spring legislative programme. And these are the two that stood out to us that will be coming up at some point this year. So firstly, the Gas Safety Amendment Bill. There's not a lot about this yet, but the purpose of the bill is to extend the liquefied petroleum gas safety regime in the existing legislation, so that all types of piped liquid petroleum gas distribution networks will become regulated by the Commission for Regulation of Utilities. So the Electricity Regulation Act 1999 will be updated and amended from this bill. And the other one is the Environment Protection Agency and Waste Management Amendment Bill. And this one, again, not a lot of information, but it's to allow the EPA to be more efficient in the decision for making industrial emission and waste licenses. Both of those have been put in the programme for priority drafting in the spring session. There hasn't been further information, but as we get that information, it will go out in our weekly alerts, and we might have some more to update in the next webinar. So that's all we've got on Ireland. I think, if you've got any questions on anything that we've discussed there, put them in the Q&A box. I would definitely have a look at the carcinogen, mutagens, reprotoxic substances if you work with chemicals at all in your business, because that's something that will affect a lot of people. Oh. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Rachel, so much. Before we move on to our last topic of the day around machinery and machinery safety, we have a second poll for you. This poll is now on your screen. You should be able to put in any information that you want. So can you... Oh, I apologize. This is the wrong poll. Sorry, technical difficulty. This one. So apologies. So will the changes to chemical agents affect your site? So here you can, we're just trying to see where we could help in the future. We're going to give everyone 30 seconds to answer. Should be on your screen. You will have had a preview for our next poll question that is part of our machinery section. Again, if you have questions, I will ask that you put them in the Q&A. I have not said this before, but I was reminded by one of my colleagues, if you are asking for a specific jurisdiction, it would be great if you could add the jurisdiction as well in your question. If you've already submitted your question, don't worry, we will figure it out or send you a message to clarify. So we're going to give everyone another minute or another couple of seconds to answer. If not, we're going to stop there and share the results. So it looks like the it's a mix. About 70% are not affected, but there is a third of you who are affected by the changes to chemical agents. So definitely, if you're in Ireland and will be affected by the changes to the carcinogen, mutagens, and reprotoxic substances, make sure you're checking out the new code of practice and looking at the maximum emission exposure values. Great. So I'll hand it back to Rachel to tell us or to talk to us more about machinery hazards and legislative requirements.
Thank you. So this is both applicable to the UK and Ireland, because it's something that we've noticed in sort of looking at prosecutions for both the UK and Ireland. It's coming up as a theme of injuries and sort of an increase in injuries. So if you look at the slide on the UK, the HSE in their annual report have said that they had 600,000 workers that sustained a non-fatal workplace injury in the 2022-23 reporting period. Now that's come from self-reporting and not from lost time or RIDDOR, which was less. So 600,000 people sustaining a workplace injury is still a significant number. And being struck by a moving part was the third most common type of injury. They haven't broken that down into what type of machinery, but looking at the sort of prosecutions that the HSE are publishing, a lot of those seems to be people getting fingers trapped, having arms, legs amputated. So we're seeing this trend, and that's why we thought it would be something useful to discuss. And so you can see on the prosecutions there, we've got the company was fined £800,000 after 2 young workers lost fingers in incidents at 2 different sites. So lack of compliance across the board there. And the other one was one that we found interesting, and it's a company that failed to put in appropriate measures to access dangerous parts of machinery. They were fined £32,000, and this came out a couple of weeks ago, and you'll be able to find it on the HSE news website, part of the website. This looks like it wasn't from the back of an injury, and they weren't prosecuted because of the injury. They were prosecuted because of the unsafe condition. So we don't know what's caused that inspection, whether it was a report or was a spot inspection, but the HSE are going out there and prosecuting for lack of compliance with the regulations. And it's similar in Ireland. We've seen the HSA have had similar prosecutions. So you can see on the screen there, we've got a company that was fined €75,000. They're failing to comply with their general duties. And that was someone who had their hand amputated. And they've said that machinery hazards, loss of control of objects, machines, or vehicles is the 4th leading cause of non-fatal injuries in Ireland. And in heavy industry, it's even higher than that. And I think what sort of made it relevant to us is the HSA have also announced that they've got a farm machinery safety awareness campaign that launched just at the start of the month. And they've said that's because of the number of fatalities and injuries associated with machinery. Now, that's just in the agriculture industry. That doesn't mean that they're not going to go ahead and do further campaigns in other industries in the future. So I think, Helen, if we've got a poll now for you. So I'll give you a minute to answer this. You can put in write in whatever you want. So can you think of any safeguards or controls that will ensure safe use of machinery? We'll give you a second and then we'll have a look at the answers.
So you should be able to type in answers, and we welcome any that you want to provide. So it could be examples that you have on site, examples that you've seen, that you've heard of. Again, this is more of a discussion piece. We want to see what people are thinking of when we're talking about safeguards and controls to ensure safe use of machinery. So we're going to give it another 10 seconds to get the last answers in, and then we'll share the results. Okay, I will now share the results for everyone to see. And can you see the results on your side?
I can't see them here. Don't know if people have just got them back. We'll be able to have a look at some of those afterwards. But if you just think about what you've put there and see if what we talk about next is similar to what you thought about. And again, it's for both the UK and Ireland. And a lot of these things, that's why we've discussed it together, because although we've got different regulations, a lot of it's very similar. And the controls to keep people safe from machinery are very similar. So if we just have a look at the next slide, this is some of the things that we thought, and this isn't an extensive list, it's sort of some prompts, some things for you to think about. So if we think about first the risk hierarchy, so if you can't eliminate the use of machinery, then can you reduce the use of machinery? And if you can't do that, if you've got to use it, then you've got risk assessment. That's in the centre because that's a fundamental legal requirement. And you've got to then think in your risk assessment of the other things that we've got there. So thinking of if you've got some machinery on your site, if you've finished this webinar and you go out and look at some machinery that you've got, have a look to see if you've got a safe system of work for that machinery. If someone's using it, can you find their training records? Have they been supervised accordingly for the task? Is it guarded well enough? Have they got access to moving parts? Do people know not to remove guards? Have you got additional signage as a reminder of the risks? Can the equipment be easily isolated in case of emergency? So if you look at the images that we've got on the screen, do you have signs like that near your machinery? Are your guards painted a colour so people know that they shouldn't remove them, or they know that that's where the risk is? So all of this information here is easily accessible in the legislation. So we just move on to the next slide. And in the UK, you can find this in the provision and use of work equipment regulations. So chapters 2, 3 and 4. They're the ones that sort of cover general machinery, power presses. And then you've got the lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations. Section 4 of that is outlines requirements for lifting operations, and then pressure equipment safety regulations. And in Ireland, we've got some, again, like I said before, very similar sort of compliance requirements. So think of this legislation is your minimum, and then you can put in additional best practices. So we've got in Ireland, Section 8 of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, and then also Chapter 2 of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work General Application Regulations, which goes into much more specific detail. And Section 28 covers the duties of the employer. The regulations for both contain information on maintenance, inspection, guarding, protection devices. And in Ireland, the Chapter 2 of the regulations, that was taken into account for one of the prosecutions on one of the previous slides. So it is something that is considered looking at compliance with these regulations in prosecution. So if you look as well on Ireland, we've got the Machinery Directive. That's an EU directive which governs health and safety requirements for machinery. It covers primarily equipment placed on the market and product safety requirements. That's relevant to producers and consumers of equipment. And so you know the sections numbers that you need to look at if you're working with machinery. We've also got some more practical guidance. You should be aware of the safe use of work equipment in the UK, it's the approved code of practice. And in Ireland, there's the use of work equipment guide. The EU have also published a guide to application of the Machinery Directive. And the HSA website in Ireland has a lot of good information on which section numbers are applicable for use of machinery. So if we look what's coming up, we've had some questions about the machinery regulation in Ireland in the past. So the machinery regulation becomes legally binding on all EU member states on the 20th of January 2027. It's currently the transitional period, so it's expected, so this came out last year, it's expected from 2023 to 2027 that producers of machinery become compliant. So once you hit that 20th of January date, you should be compliant with the regulations. And it requires safety of machinery for human use to be guaranteed to prevent injury from machinery hazards. It includes changes to legal consequences if substantial modifications to machinery are made. The UK has also got some changes coming up. So from the 1st of January 2025, any machinery that's used in the UK will require the UK CA markings. That's alongside the CE markings. And also producers of machinery must provide a declaration of conformity in English with the instructions. So that's everything we've got on machinery. I hope that was useful. Maybe prompt some of you to go and have a look, see if your machines are in, your machinery is up to the sort of required standard for wherever you're based. If you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll try our best to answer them.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think that was very interesting for us to hear, especially with upcoming changes and compliance requirements that are going to be changing in the next couple of months and years. So we're going to turn our attention to questions now. If you've not had a chance, please feel free to start adding in or continue adding in your questions as we go. We will answer as many as possible while we're here. Any others will be answered online afterwards. So I see one for the UK. So the question is, my company in England imports cardboard sheets from Belgium and then makes them into boxes and containers of various size for clients in England and Scotland. Are we considered a first UK owner for this cardboard? So packaging materials have to be filled before they enter the UK for you to be considered a first UK owner. So unless the packaging itself has materials in it, you will not be considered a first UK owner in this instance. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. We will do our best to point you in the right direction to get the additional guidance to know which it would be. Let's see, other questions to answer. We have one around changes in the EPA. So what will the changes to EPA waste license roughly look like? Rachel?
Yeah, so the changes that I discussed in Ireland, we don't know yet. We think that what's come out on the bill or on the proposed bill is that it'll become more efficient. So if you submit sort of to the EPA, it should be more efficient for them to get back to you. That's the premise of the bill. They haven't said that anything about the waste licenses looking different. It's a couple of lines in the spring legislative programme is all that they've published so far. So I'd expect it. They've said spring drafting 2024. So we're hoping that we'll get something come out soon. So we'll keep people informed and hopefully we'll be able to discuss it in the next webinar.
Great. So the more changes to come, but good news to hear that we're on top of it, especially if there's not been any indication of what the changes would be. I see a question around ESOS compliance. How do I get an ESOS compliance assessment? So to do so, you can outsource the assessment if you are not ISO accredited, because you are required to have a lead assessor if you are not ISO accredited. So this could be either on site or as a third-party contractor, and they would conduct the assessment. The assessment, you can also conduct the assessment yourself if needed, but it would need to be verified by a lead assessor. The assessment is required every 4 years and involves calculating your total energy consumption, auditing 90% of your energy consumption, and identifying consumption reduction strategies. It also requires you to create a consumption report and identify energy efficiencies and have a board level director sign off to ensure that they've reviewed the report. So hopefully that answers your question on compliance assessments, ESOS compliance assessments. I'm seeing a question for Ireland. Do I need to employ specific chemical experts to complete my site risk assessments? Rachel?
Yeah, so the regulations say that you need to engage a competent person for risk assessment. So it needs to be someone who understands and has the appropriate knowledge. It could be someone who works for your company. In the regulations, it will have more details about what a competent person is. But if you don't think you've got the relevant knowledge, or you don't have the skills or capacity to be able to carry out the monitoring that you need and the health record, monitor the health records, then you could consider engaging an occupational hygienist.
Great. That's very good to know, and a good place to start if you need to review that. I'm seeing another question for the UK. Where can I find the allocation window in the greenhouse gas emission trading scheme? So for that, it depends on which window you're talking about. So the obligation for the window to open is under the Greenhouse Gas Emission Trading Order of 2020 in section 27A. You can also see it on and in additional UK ETS government guidance. After each allocation window, each relevant authority, so that could be the Environment Agency, it could be CEPA, it could be the Natural Resources, Wales, or any of the relevant agencies, they have to publish the allocation tables for the period that they're concerned. So if, as you know, the next window is, or the next period is 2026 to 2030, we are currently in the 2020 to 2026. I assume, I apologize, I don't have the exact date, but it should be, we're currently in the middle of an allocation period. So this will be replaced in 2026. And so this next window opens on the 1st of April 2025 and closes on the 30th of June 2025. I hope that that does answer your question, but if you do have any additional ones, we're happy to answer them as well. We have another question around chemical agents. Rachel, do I need to redo our chemical agents risk assessments, and by what date, if so?
So these regulations came into force on the 5th of April. So if you need to have a look at the regulations and look at the code of practice and see if anything has changed, and you should be reviewing your risk assessments if they have changed.
Thank you. And then we've got a question around if the ESOS report is specific to the UK. So at this time, yes, the legislation is specific to the UK, so the changes to it are specific to the UK. At this point, yes, and there would be similar schemes in other parts of the world, including in Ireland and the rest of the EU. We will make sure to send you more information offline afterwards. We may be able to talk about it more next time if it's of interest to people. We have had some questions around if we could receive a recording of the webinar. Yes, after this, you will be receiving an email where you can see a replay of the webinar. And I think we have time maybe for one last question. Let's see. In Ireland, if I don't have farm machinery on site, do the HSA do any other machinery campaigns?
So at the moment, they announced the farm machinery campaign and accompanying inspections. So that's just in the agriculture industry, but we've seen in the past when there's been so they've focused on one area. So there was a transport one last year, and they did it in one industry, and then a few weeks later they announced another campaign for another industry. So just because it's not right now doesn't mean that they're not going to do one. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. From here, I think any other questions that have not been answered, we will answer them via email. Please make sure you can still submit questions, but we're also available at any time. I think I will pass it back to Guy to finish us off today.
Thank you, Helene. We've addressed some of your specific questions. There may be gaps in your knowledge about Red Online, who we are, what we do, and the value that we deliver to you. Let me put it like this. Our intention is to deliver you tailored, applicable legal content and present that information to you in such a way that it enables you to focus on your broader strategic goals and reduce the stress, the time and the energy that you might normally consider with understanding what those legal obligations are. And of course, we present that information in such a way that enables you to understand how that impacts your business and how you can use that content to drive improvement and increase operational efficiency moving forward. Next slide. The crown jewels in the Red Online crown, if you like, are our EHS compliance regulatory monitoring modules. That's part of a broader solution. Through the compliance suite, what we'll deliver to you, just in case I haven't got that message across so far, is a legal register that only contains tailored, applicable legal content. We'll also maintain that content for you, ensuring your legal register remains up to date and applicable. We'll also provide you with regulatory monitoring services so you know what's coming down the track towards you. I've not met anybody, any one EHS professional yet that likes regulatory surprise. So we'll take that opportunity or that likelihood off of the table. And of course, providing you with the tools within the platform directly, so you're not taking information out that will enable you to put in place those appropriate corrective actions when you identify them. Helen, next slide. Red Online is an international business. Our footprint is global. There are all sorts of benefits to that same quality of service that we provide in the UK and Ireland can extend to other countries around the world as well. And the service doesn't change in terms of what we deliver or the quality of the content that we deliver to. It also means, of course, we're able to provide access to that legal content in multiple different languages. I think Red Online has learned over our 25-year heritage that the value of a platform like ours is derived directly from user engagement. So if we can provide access to a platform and legal content in a user's primary language, that's a significant step in that direction. Helen, I would say next slide. There is one. Fantastic. Should you decide to work with Red Online, you're being good company. I call this the Formula One slide because of the logos. What you'll appreciate is the companies on this slide, they present us with some high levels of expectation in terms of quality of product, quality of service. So for Red Online to be achieving a 98% renewal rate year on year, we will only ever ask you to commit to a 12-month contract. Certainly says to me that we're doing something right. That about wraps it up, Helen.
Thank you so much, Guy, and thank you everyone for attending today. We will be emailing you afterwards with the replay for this webinar. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We also have online a full range of other webinars that have been going on, including earlier today, one around ESG, and we know that there are others on different regions that we cover, including the US and Europe, that will be coming on soon. Thank you again. Have a good day, everyone, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.